Matter Richard Jones v. Lumbee Tribe Election Board and Larry Chavis, case number 2023-08-01. Justices Tona Jacobs, Kelvin Jacobs, Eric Freeman, and Chief Justice Mark Brooks.
Good evening. One is doing well. Elections board. Um, um, Chavis, how you doing? I think that we need to serve a place up here as well. Don't be shy. This is case number 23081. Mr. Richard Jones versus the respondent, the Lumbee Tribe Elections Board. Upon its own motion, the court, after reviewing the pleadings, determined that it was suitable to include Mr. Larry Chavis as a party, given that this would directly affect his candidacy six tribal council election. Before we get into any of the merits of the case, we will first begin by taking care of some housekeeping matters. I want to introduce ourselves. We are going to go through a procedure where we invite the justices to make parties aware of any potential biases or potential conflicts might exist. We want to conduct a fair, impartial hearing. We want all sides to be courteous. There will be an opportunity for each side to present its case, each side to cross-examine each respective party. And so we hope to have an expeditious but effective and efficient hearing this evening. On behalf of the Supreme Court, my name is Mark Brooks. I am the sitting Chief Justice on the bench. I am from the Pembroke community, and I will begin with my left, and I will ask each justice to introduce themselves and which community they are from.
Good evening. My name is Eric Freeman. I'm from the Prospect community.
Evening. My name is Tona Jacobs, and I'm from Hoke County.
At this time, I would invite the justices, if they are aware of any potential or actual conflicts of interest in this case that they might be aware of, if they would like to disclose that at this time, they may do so. Hearing none, I will now ask the parties if they are aware or they have a reasonable belief that any of the justices have an existing conflict that would prevent them from hearing this matter.
I have no reason.
Have none either.
Davis, are you?
I don't have.
All right. Having heard none of those, we will begin with the merits of this case. What I think will probably be helpful is each side I will invite to come to the podium to give an opening statement of why they're here. And we'll begin with the petitioner.
Chief Justice, I have being new to this, this procedure have a little bit more than an open statement. Can I read that? Or
When you say a little bit more, is that your presentation that you?
yes, sir.
I think it would be helpful for us, Mr. Jones, if we can maybe narrow or identify the issue first. And so I don't want to make it difficult for you.
I was asking, but I have more time to come
Oh,
back.
yes, absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
I can do that. Good evening, everybody. I'm Richard Jones from Tribal Council District 6. I'd like to start out by saying thank you for hearing the case, and I'll begin. When our founding members created the Lumbee Constitution, it was designed to be fair and equitable across the territory for all Lumbee citizens. It doesn't say except for 12 or 6 or 7. What is good for one district should be good for all districts. We allow what the election board has ruled on. One family or 3 people could consistently rule District 7. Our founders have put items in place to control this. Thank you very much.
Mr. Jones, correct me. I may have misspoken. This is District 7 at your race?
I'm in District 6.
You're in District 6.
Yes.
You're just using District 7
I'm
as an
using
example.
District 7 as
Okay.
an example. I have other items to
All right.
follow up with that,
I'm sorry, Mr. Jones.
as well as 12.
I appreciate that. Thank you
Yes,
for
sir.
clarifying that. The Elections Board would like to respond with an opening statement.
Honor, we will, our opening statement is going to be our brief that we give you. You want us to do that? That we sent to you. That is our opening statement.
We'll
Want us
receive.
to read it?
We'll receive that as on behalf of your opening statement.
Your Honors, I'm going to begin with the second paragraph.
Okay.
In 2022, this issue surfaced where the vacant seat occurred due to the death of a council member in District 7 with 2 years remaining in his term, which resulted in a special election to fill the vacant seat. District 7 is represented by 3 council members. A former council member of that district who had served 2 consecutive 3-year terms and had been off the council for 2 years filed for that vacant seat. The issue was brought to the attention of the Lumbee Tribe Elections Board, and council members questioning the interpretation of the Constitution as stated in Article 7, Section 2. In March of 2022, the Lumbee Tribe Elections Board meeting on election ordinances amendment recommendations in the presence of the Constitution and Ordinance Committee Chairman and several council members, Article 7, Section 2 of the Constitution was discussed. There were various interpretations of this section of the Lumbee Constitution. Specifically, the dialogue consisted of how different districts, some represented by multiple council members, some with a single council member, are treated under the verbiage in that section of the Lumbee Constitution. This section in question is Article 7, Section 2. Except as otherwise provided, members of the tribal council shall serve 3-year terms, and no council member can serve more than 2 consecutive terms. The privilege to run for election tribal council shall be limited to those members of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, and then it goes on to other qualifications. And then we state the following. This section of the Constitution does not specifically state how long a council member must sit out before they can run again after having served 2 consecutive terms. The Lumbee Tribe Election Boards had to rely on the term consecutive as our only guidance. We interpret this to mean that should a particular council member serve his or her 2 consecutive terms and then sit out for any amount of time, they're able to run again should an opening occur in their district, since there would have been a break between the 2 consecutive terms and the new term for which the candidate would be seeking. And then we list alternate views to that idea about only serving 2 consecutive terms. We have had precedents in this issue. In the year that Mr. Rudy ran, he was Miss Jan Lowry, had been off the council, I believe, for 2 years. She filed to run, and we allowed her to run under this same idea of not being consecutive. So Mr. Rudy won the seat, but we did allow Miss Jan to run because she had been off the council for 2 years, and then she applied to run again. So there is precedence in our allowing this to occur in our elections. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Davis, would you like to make an opening statement?
I'm gonna go along with board elections because they have presidents have been set before, back when Larry Townsend ran, and also back when Paul Brooks ran.
Mr. Jones, before I hand it over to you to present your case, I'm gonna just restate what I believe, and any other members of the court can jump in. It appears that you have filed this petition seeking to have Mr. Chavis's name removed from the ballot on the basis that you allege that he would be in violation of Article 7, Section 2 of the Lumbee Constitution. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair, and a couple other
Okay,
items.
all right. And specifically, is it your position that if he is allowed to run in this upcoming election, that he will in fact violate the 2 consecutive term limit imposed by that section?
Yes, sir.
All right. If you are ready, Mr. Jones, we will turn it over to you to present your case.
Okay. I'd like to start back where our founders put items in place to control things like this. Instead of saying that a constitution is silent when it's not, the Lumbee Tribal Elections Board should have not let Mr. Chavis file and let him challenge whatever ruling or loophole, in his words, that they wanted to come about. In the preamble, it states about midways down that the tribe adopts this constitution for the purpose of establishing a tribal.
I apologize, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Jones. I think I've missed a step, of an important step. Not my intention to interrupt you, but I think the parties ought to be affirmed.
Raise your right hand. Please stand. Yes. You solemnly affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth to the best of your knowledge?
And Mr. Jones, I'm taking some liberties here this evening. Would you just identify yourself for those
Yes.
who may be listening?
Richard Jones, District 6, Tribal Council.
Davis.
I'm Larry Chavis of District 6.
And Ms. Mitchell, would you announce yourself and who's with you?
I'm Louise Mitchell, Chairman of the Lumbee Election Board.
Again, I apologize, Mr. Jones. We'll turn it back over to you.
But about midways down in the preamble, the tribe adopts this constitution for the purpose of establishing a tribal government structure, preserving for all time the Lumbee way of life and community, promoting the educational, cultural, social, and economic well-being of the Lumbee people, and securing justice and freedom for the Lumbee people. But as I go through my presentation, I'd like for you to think about the tribal government structure part and preserving for all time the Lumbee way of life and community. It does say in my first point, it does say in Article 7, Section 2, and this is in relations to, in the election board's own words, in their other two items where they were discussing whether they should let a person run on running 2 years and then having a break, or running just 2 years. 2 years. And I'm going to show you in three different spots in the Constitution where the Constitution has set term limits. Number one, it says, except otherwise in Article 7, Section 2. It says, except otherwise provided, members of the tribal council shall serve 3-year terms, and no council member can serve more than 2 consecutive terms. And I also go to Article 10, Section 2, and it talks about board members in the elections board. Each of the 5 appointing committees shall appoint 1 election board member. The board member shall serve 6-year terms and may not serve consecutive terms. Then when I go to,
Mr. Jones, do you have copies of these parts of the Constitution for us? If not, that's okay.
no, I
If you,
don't. I just have my copy.
will you give us a chance to maybe pull it up on our
Sure.
phones? Okay, your first reference, it was Article 7, Section 2, the one that's
Yes.
directly at issue. What was the second one that you mentioned?
My second one was Article 10, Section 2. Last sentence.
Can you read that sentence again for us?
That sentence says the board member shall serve 6-year terms and may not serve consecutive terms.
Right. And proceed.
And on Article 9, Section 2, the second paragraph of it, the Supreme Court of the Lumbee Constitution shall consist of 5 sitting judges who shall serve 5-year terms. No judge may serve 2 consecutive terms. I think in these statements right here, the Constitution isn't silent, and it's setting terminology on terms and how long you can run. My second point is Article 7, number 3E. Now, in the 2 statements that I read from the elections board, it was one on could term limits end after 2 consecutive terms, or this is the part where I would like to explain about the Lumbee way of life. Our Supreme Court is made up of normally 5 justices, 2 with a law degree, 3 that's layman, to help preserve that Lumbee way and common sense way of life. But in here, I've got, and this proves about the staggeredness of this. Our founders started this out staggering it, and it says in 3E, 1 year. Okay, let me start back. Upon election in November 2003, the 21 tribal council members shall be divided into 3 groups of 7 by some means of chance, with the first group serving 1-year initial term, the second group serving a 2-year initial term, and the third group serving a 3-year term. In the beginnings of the Constitution, our founders seen what could possibly happen with with someone or family that could come in and set what they call set precedent and stay in office forever. And this is what the Constitution does not want. Also, um, I'd just like to reiterate about our Supreme Court justices, the 2 law school and the 3 laymen, to help preserve the Lumbee way of life and the common sense law. But I'd also like to finish by, well, before I finish, Mr. Brooks brought up, Mr. Larry Chavis brought up about Larry Townsend and the Paul Brooks case. These 2 cases were about terms itself. What's the definition of term? So we have decided what definition of term is. So now we're moving on how long you can stay in office. And I don't think our founding fathers wanted people staying in office more than six years, based on this information right here, especially not 12 and 15. Actions like this is why council right now is having to hire a lawyer, costing our Lumbee citizens money. If we allow this, people like Mr. Chavis, who has already broken the Constitution, could sit on this council and not get the things passed that needs to be done, and this can be an unfair advantage that could take place. The Lumbee Supreme Court can set a precedent. I think the Lumbee Supreme Court sets the precedent, not the elections board. The council sets the precedents by our laws. I suggest Mr. Chavis not be able to run, and I think he should be given his money, be refunded his money. The Lumbee Tribal Elections Board should refund his money, and this will show the Lumbee people that our Constitution is strong and protects our citizens, and will give them confidence in our tribal government structure.
That conclude your presentation, Mr. Jones.
Yes, sir.
At this time, I'm going to invite the parties if they have any questions of Mr. Jones. The elections board have any questions that they would like to pose to Mr. Jones? Davis, do you have any questions? At this time, elections board, do you have any further presentation other than what Dr. Clark has already presented?
Your Honor, except that we know when the Constitution was first written in 2001, we had 18 districts.
Yes.
Some of those districts were multiple districts. I think it was, I'd have to go back and look at my record too, but there were some multiple districts and there was some single districts. And you know, whenever there was a referendum done in 2003, it changed to 14 districts. We have a lot of work yet to do, I feel like, with the Constitution, because there are some gray areas. But as this election board looked at the language and the way it's written in this particular section of the Constitution, it is not clear to say, well, and we mentioned that in our respondent. Some person could interpret, say, well, you served 2 consecutive terms and you shouldn't never run again. The Constitution doesn't say that. The other thing that's missing in this particular part, we do recognize what a term is 3 years. It's when a person starts the commencement of if they win the election. But it's also silent on how long that person should sit out. We know they can't run right after the consecutive terms. We know that. They're going to have to sit out some point in time. And it was the assumption I'm thinking, and maybe this is just me, but back when all districts were single, nobody could run again until that 3 years, until that person vacated that seat, either upon, their term was up, or otherwise they may have vacated that seat because of sickness or something like that, or death. But the Constitution is silent on how long a former council member that served 2 consecutive terms should sit out. It doesn't say 1 year, it doesn't say 2 years, it doesn't say 3 years. So the election board, when we went back and looked at the Constitution, our interpretation of it was that it was silent. He had set off a one-year term, so we felt that he was eligible to run. That, yeah, we done that last year in 2022 in districts, I think it was 7. Yeah, District 7, Mr. Mercer's seat. So, the Constitution's clear on how you fill those seats. It's clear. It's clear with the council members and it's clear with the chairman. So we're not here. We have no, I'm going to say what I think it was some of the members on LSD said, we have no dog in the fight. We just want what is right by the Constitution, and we know that there are gray areas in the Constitution that needs to be fixed. Now, one of the things that's happening now among the tribal council is that they're working on a map to make all of the districts single. But when you have districts that started in 2001 and it's here in 2014, you've got districts that have multiple seats, one that's got 3, some that's got 2. And I don't know of any other election board chairman or election board that maybe had the situation that we're in today or with this particular situation. But I know this, it's the first. So when you have nothing in place, sometimes we, as serving as a tribal council member before, we want to write the laws as a council member, not having the court to write the laws for us. But the Constitution is like it is right now. Nobody can do with anything to this Constitution until it's amended or whatever the ruling of the court's going to be. But we took the view that it was silent on how long an individual could sit out.
Mr. Chavis, do you have any questions of the board?
Only thing I wanted to say was the seat that I held, Miss Christie Hunt, Miss Revels Hunt won my seat. I understand that, but this was a different seat in the same district. So I thought all times I had right to run again because I did set out, like I said, a year, and then I put forth that I was going to run again, and then the election board told me I had all right to, so I figured it was all right to run.
You have any questions, Mr. Jones, of the board?
Yes, I do. The Constitution, it also doesn't say, well, Miss Louise, when you added that, when you said what you said, do you think you've added language to the Constitution when we're talking about the Constitution only says 2 consecutive terms. So when you said by saying they can stay out and return again, does that say that in the Constitution? They can run 2 consecutive terms and that they can stay out and run again?
Presidents has been set, Mr. Richard, and it's been set since 2000, I think, 4. We have a list of about maybe 10 or 12. I could give you the correct judge if you'd like it. That we've had people that served 12 years a total. We've had some that served a total of 9 years, but they never ran. Whenever it was a consecutive term, they stayed out. And then when a seat became vacant and they had stayed out or sit out a length of time, then they were eligible to run. So I don't feel like I'm writing anything in the Constitution because I never would do that, Mr. Richard. But precedents was been set way back in 2004. We have council members that have served 2 consecutive terms, and then they sit out, they'd come back, they'd win that seat, they'd serve another. And so we have some members that have served 12 years a total. So
What we like to say on the council, just because we've done it in the past, don't make it right. We like to fix problems. So I wouldn't call it. Just because you were doing it, don't mean you were setting precedent. But it does say that. I'm gonna read it again. that no council member can serve more than no council member can serve more than 2 consecutive terms. But after that, it does not say that they can stay out and run again. But it also,
I would just invite you, Mr. Jones, that if you have questions, bring your statements in the form of
in question,
questions.
gotcha. But if you could, I'm asking, does it say that in the Constitution?
Can you elaborate what exactly, does it say what, Mr. Jones? So we can follow.
I got some notes here. The Constitution only says 2 consecutive terms. So, Miss Louise, are you adding to the language by saying they can stay out and return?
Or I'm not, but it's just happened in the past, and I want a board member back in 2000. On the election board back then. Other board members, other chairmen, or the election board members were there.
Do any of the justices have any questions they'd like to ask?
I have one. Mr. Jones, so what in your interpretation, what would be an acceptable time frame between elections to meet the criteria?
I see it two ways, Mr. Freeman. If we rule that you can only run 2 terms, then you can't run again. But in the past, as Ms. Louise has stated, when people did sit out, they would sit out, and it's a law of the land. It's the people's rule. If you ask anybody, they all say it. Why is he running? He didn't sit out 3 years. If we do something like this, and we're just opening up something that we see on all these stereotypical American Indian shows where a family gets in and you don't get them out.
So, just so I'm clear, Mr. Jones, are you saying it's your belief that Article 7, Section 2 limits candidates to 2 terms total?
I'm looking at that based on the other terms.
Yes, yes. So when Miss Mitchell says that there have been persons who have ran successfully for 4 terms, ran successfully for a second consecutive term, and then there was a period that interrupted, and then they came back and ran for a third unconsecutive term. Your belief is that Article 7, Section 2 would prevent that person from running for that third unconsecutive term? Well, yeah, certainly.
Yes.
I'm asking for you to
But
share
see,
with us.
can I ask? Can I ask this question, and that'll help me answer?
Okay.
When the Miss Louise or someone from the elections board, could you read your other statements on how people possibly could read this? You didn't announce that. You didn't say those things in your opening statement.
I didn't read all of them. That when we were making an argument really for an amendment, plain people. So in what Mr. Richard is alluding to, we ask the following questions. Number one, this section of the Constitution does not specifically state how long a council member must sit out before they can run again after having served terms. And then we go on to talk about how we relied on the word consecutive. The alternate view was no council member, after having served his or her 2 consecutive terms, may ever be able to run again for tribal council. We were just saying that without that language, that could be considered an option. Well, we already see that precedents have been set for years that is not viable. Number 3, alternate view 2. Council members who have served 2 consecutive terms must sit out a term, which has been defined by the Lumbee Tribe Supreme Court as beginning when a person takes office, not by a limit of 3 years. See Larry Townsend versus Lumbee Tribe Elections Board, where the court unanimously defined the term as when a person files for election for a district seat for the tribal council and wins such election, and at the swearing-in ceremony that the said person begins that term. And then we say facts and relief. The Lumbee Tribe of Election Board, to the best of our ability and understanding Article 7, Section 2 of the Lumbee Constitution, has held the position number 1 stated above. We do realize that the redistricting process could eliminate the problem of individuals rotating on and off the tribal council in shorter periods than the 3 years or terms as most of our people view the tribal council terms. In addition, we believe that a simple solution to this issue is for the tribal council to approve an amendment to the Lumbee Constitution and finance a vote on said amendment that specifically clears up this ambiguity that we have alluded to in our response to the court.
Justice Jacobs, I believe you have a question.
Justice, Mr. Jones, help me out with a scenario. If I run for council and I win and I serve a 3-year term, and then I decide not to run for a consecutive second term, I sit out, and then 3 years later I decide to run again and win, and then decide to sit out, can that continue in perpetuity since if I never serve a consecutive second term?
Yes, sir, because nowhere in here does it say anything about when you're talking, it discusses 2-year terms.
So if
You haven't served 2 consecutive
but if I
terms
serve 2
on the council.
consecutive, it's your position that I am done for life, 6 years. Otherwise, if I sit out every other term, I can serve, any double-digit years.
If the people vote you in.
Thank you.
I would.
So I'm not trying to press you on your stance on this, but I'm only asking because in response to Justice Freeman's question that how long should a person wait out after they've ran for their second successful consecutive term? And I believe your response was that some say that they should never be allowed to run again after that second term. Am I clear in saying that you're not saying that's your belief, you're just saying that that's a possible belief?
When I was putting these together, I based it off the respondents, why they said
Okay.
Mr. Chavis should be able to run. And I guess my whole statement is they had 2 things they could have gone by. 1, term limits, 2 consecutive terms. 2 terms and never again. And in the people's way, like I said before, 2 terms, and people have set out and come back. Mr. Chavis set out 3 years and came back.
So let's use Mr. Chavis as this is the case before us, right? Let's use him as an example. How long would you say that Mr. Chavis needs to sit out before he could constitutionally run for a third term?
To be fair to all the Lumbee people, like District 1 who only has one
Yes.
council person, and they got to sit out, I think he should sit out 3 years.
Can you identify for us, Mr. Jones, when you first became elected? What year? Was it 2020?
That's right. This January will be 3 years. So
you were.
So I was elected 3 years ago this November.
Okay.
I was elected 3 years ago this November.
And Mr. Chavis, can you tell us when your first term began, or when you were elected for your first time? November of what year?
It's 2007, I believe.
Okay. I guess what might be more helpful is when were you last on the tribal council?
It came off in December this past year. So I've been this big year.
Okay.
I've been off.
So,
So you don't get sworn in until January.
so there was a new election in your previous seat in November of last year.
Yes, sir.
So in 2019, you began serving that term in 2019. You were elected to that term in 2019.
I was on the,
From 2016 to 2019, were you serving on the council at that time as well? Okay. So 2016 to 2019 was not your first term on the tribal council?
no, sir. That was my second term.
Your first term was in 2007-ish, somewhere around in there?
Two 2008 then.
Okay. I think that's helpful because it determines whether or not this case is even moot, right? So if 2019 through 2022 was not, in fact, your second consecutive term, we wouldn't even need to be here. It appears as though that was the case. Are there any other questions by any of the justices? I have a question of the elections board. I tend to agree with Mr. Jones when he says that he believes that the court should set precedent and not the board. And I don't mean that as any disrespect to the elections board. I think you guys do the very best with what you have. We've had several interactions with one another over the years. I believe you guys act in good faith. Dr. Clark in his presentation stated that Mr. Rudy Locklear ran against Miss Jan Lowry. She had already successfully completed 2 consecutive terms, was off the council for 2 years, and then she ran for a 3rd term. And the elections board concluded that she was not in violation of Article 7. Did Mr. Locklear file any type of petition with the court, to your knowledge, objecting her ability to run? Did he make any formal complaint with the elections board? So when the elections board responded to that inquiry by Miss Lowry, so did Miss Lowry ask the elections board whether or not she could run, or did she just apply and then the elections board?
Rudy a letter. Richard, when he initially asked us, we sent him the same letter, and I think there were a couple community members that actually sent them the same letter that we'd sent Mr. Booty.
To your knowledge, has that been the ordinary procedure of the elections board? It appears in your
And I don't mean, and I understand the word. We were using the word precedent in the sense that it's been done before, not like we've.
it was your practice.
Yeah, right. It's practice,
And it hadn't been objected to. And to Mr. Jones's point, just because it's been done and it hasn't been objected to, in your brief, which I have to say, thank you very much for your brief. I think it was very helpful. I do think that, and I believe Mr. Jones would even agree with this. It's helpful in explaining what's before us, what the competing views are, and so thank you for that. I did have a question as it related to, I got the impression that there was some conversations between the elections board and that this also came up to the tribal council. Did I understand that?
It did not go before the tribal council. There was rumor before the filing ever happened that Miss Jen may be running. And there was pros and cons, just like in this pros and cons of these alternate views. And there were pros and cons, but we have been working with the constitutional chairperson at that time and some council members on getting the election ordinance. There's some gray areas there that needs to be fixed. And in our working on that, when this conversation came up, and there were the alternate views that we have in the response to you today. Um, Your Honor, we as a board member, we took this constitution, we looked at it, and we saw that there was silence that needed to be fixed because several people could interpret it the way Mr. Richard has interpreted. You could never run again.
Yes.
And then there's other people, and through the court case with Larry Townsend, a person's term starts if they win the election when they start. So there's gray areas that needs to be fixed, but
To your knowledge, Ms. Mitchell, has the court ever ruled that a person could not run for a third unconsecutive term?
not to my knowledge, sir.
To your knowledge, has that ever been the case, Mr. Jones?
No, sir.
Justice Jacobs, do you have a question?
I do for Mr. Jones. I just want to make sure, since there have been several opinions on what consecutive means, does it mean term limits, et cetera? Based on your petition to the court, though, I just want to be clear what you are asking. If I'm not mistaken, just reading from your petition, it says the Constitution does not give exceptions, and therefore, by allowing a former council person to seek reelection without waiting a term in a district is not fair. Are you saying that Mr. Jones has not, I'm sorry, Mr. Chavis has not waited a term?
I'm saying that when I wrote my first plaintiff, I guess you would say, my first statement to the elections board and to the justices, that's what I was stating, that he is not set out. Because what's fair for district? My thing is, what's fair for our Lumbee citizens that only have one council rep should be fair for all. I wrote this extra when I got the respondents' feedback because I feel like they had two ways that they could have said, no, sir, it looks like, just like they're saying, it looks like it's silent. I'm saying it's not. They say it is. But they had two ways to stop this. And then to put the ball in Mr. Chavis's court to say, no, I see it this way. It's a big difference.
Again, just so I'm clear, the issue you have before the court is that he has not set out a term which you're defining as 3 years,
Yeah,
correct?
yes, sir.
Thank you.
So, in fairness, Mr. Jones, and I'm not trying to trip you up or twist your words or anything. You said that the cases that Mr. Chavis referenced, the Larry Townsend and the Paul Brooks case, he stated that they defined what a term is, and I think you said that this case was not about the definition of a term.
Well, I may have misspoke. The way I took it, what he was saying, that we've already had this
Yes.
related to what we're talking about now, those cases were about terms. That's what I was saying.
Okay.
That they were set.
Those were much different situations.
Different
Okay.
situations compared to what we're talking about right now.
But you are asking the court to use that definition of term in those cases as a 3-year period. You're asking us to apply that.
Yes, and that's because that's what we serve is 3-year terms. Like I said, what's good for the districts, the Lumbee citizens, to be fair to all Lumbee citizens. And what happens in District 1 should happen also in District 6.
What do you say to that, Mr. Chavis?
Well, I was looking at it as by being two representative in there. If I was running for my seat that I held, I
Yes.
would have said it been a 3-year term because I had to wait 3 years before it became available again. But
Yeah.
this is a different seat. And like y'all said, it might divide up or they're going to be in separate districts anyway.
Yes.
And then I wouldn't, if it had been in different districts, I wouldn't have been able to serve anyway, but it's in the same district. So I say I had the right to run, but it's up to y'all. Also, I want to state that back in 2019, I believe it was, as a council member, we wrote an ordinance that election board had to wait 3 years coming off the election board to be able to run for a council seat because they might have information, just saying they might get information of people where they district they stand in or whatever, and you can use that against anybody else that's running against them for
Yes.
election.
Yes.
And so we wrote that, but Richard took it to court. I believe he took it to court, I want to say, and won that case that he can run for that seat.
Yes.
So
Do you remember that, Mr. Jones?
I remember the case, but I didn't take it to court.
That was a long night, wasn't
And yes, it was super long. They asked today how long it was going to be, and I said, I don't know.
it?
But in that case, I didn't carry it to court.
You were not the petitioner.
I was not the petitioner.
But
Can I ask a follow-up?
you prevailed.
Yes, I did.
Just a follow-up clarification question, Mr. Chavis. If you'll educate me, when you refer to your seat, your prior seat, if I'm not mistaken, are there 3 people in your district? Two. Are those 2 seats enumerated in a certain way? Is one considered seat 7 and another seat 8?
oh, they just 2 seats in District 6.
Okay, thank you.
Do you know why the elections for those are not held at the same time?
Because you alternate years, because if you heal them at the same time, that means 2 people be coming off at the same time, and then nobody know what's going on in your district and stuff like.
We're not elected persons up here. We wouldn't know the answer to that. Mr. Jones, do you remember the court's reasoning in that case and why we determined that you were fit to run in that election?
I'd like to have a disclaimer. I think I'm known to be telling the truth. I think it was because I was already on the elections board. I think now, but I'm not really sure, and I felt like I should have been grandfathered in.
That's been a few
I
minutes.
think that's the way it was. I'm not really sure.
So that would have been prior to November of 2020. Would that have been maybe September of that year?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay. My recollection in that case, and I appreciate Mr. Chavis for bringing that up because I do think that it sort of helps the parties understand kind of the thought process of the court. My recollection in that case, Mr. Jones, is that the court held that the Constitution specifically enumerates what the qualifications are for a person to be able to run for tribal office. And just off the top of my head, I think one of those is that you have to live in the district in which you're seeking to run. You have to be of a certain age. I think there was even a requirement that says that at some point the tribal council may impose a restriction that if a person is a felon, that they will not be allowed to run. But I think the reasoning of the court in that case was that we believed that by passing an ordinance restricting a person from coming off the elections board and limiting their ability to run for office based on the time that they came off the elections board, we found that to be the equivalent of a constitutional amendment. Does that sound fair? It has not been published. We need to get on that. Thank you for sharing that. You've asked them numerous times.
Wait till I run, Your Honor.
Well, we will take notice of that this evening. Yes. This is helpful. Who do you know who you notified? Oh Lord. That's been some time. Justice Malcolm's been off the bench for some time. Thank you for that consideration because the court is aware of concerns in the past of issues where responses have not been made. And it's very important to the court. I believe it's been important to past courts as well. Yes. Can't find it. That, and certainly that is helpful when you're trying to come to court, argue your case, present an established precedent. Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Clark. We'll try to address that. Do you recall that, Mr. Jones, that being our reasoning as a court, that we felt that it unfair to add an additional qualification to your candidacy, that in and of itself was unconstitutional?
I don't recall
Okay,
that, sir.
that's fair. Do you, I'm gonna pose this to Mr. Chavis. Mr. Jones has said that he believes that it's an issue of fairness. Well, he's not limited to that, but he's saying that it's not less than that. Do you have any opinion on whether or not it's fair or unfair for you to be able to run in this election, given that you've only been off the council for a year? Does that sound like an issue of fairness to you?
Me, it don't, because, you know, the people in the community spoke. And that's the only reason I'm running, because they asked me to run.
Yes.
And the people in the community wants me to run, so I done what the people in the community asked me to do. But they don't want to do the electing. I don't want to elect myself. I do vote for myself, but I don't elect myself. If it's the people in the community gets out and vote, the better man gets the seat.
Does that seem like an unfair response or an inadequate response to you, Mr. Jones?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
I knew we would possibly have this conversation. He is the Pepsi man. I knew I'd see him in the store, and he said that to me. But my statement is, you tell him you're breaking the Constitution, that you're skirting the Constitution.
Would you believe that he is?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I don't think it's fair. It's not fair. It's not fair to all. When we take oath, I don't just take it for six. I take it for all the Lumbee people, all of y'all, everybody. I just don't think it's fair. I don't think it's any fair nor right. Just because it doesn't specifically give you a subject and verb and punctuation and everything, we know what's right. That's where the Lumbee in here. That's where the Lumbee way of life comes around. That's why we have 3 laymen on the Supreme Court, so we don't get bogged down. If we keep this up, we're going to have a lawyer for every council person, for every electoral board, maybe the justice might end up having to have lawyers. But it's getting to that point when we know what's right and what's fair.
To Mr. Chavis's point, I think he's making the case that it would be unfair to persons in that district not to be able to decide. Would you disagree with that position?
Say that one more time, please.
I don't want to put words in Mr. Chavis's mouth, but based on his response, I think he's saying that it would be unfair to persons in that council district to not be able to decide who they want to run for this seat. How would you respond to that?
If I was, I don't know way I can answer that. I was in that position and they came to me and said, "Buddy, you want to run again?" I would say, I can't run again. I got to sit off. I mean, that's easy for me to say right here.
Yes, yes.
That's easy for me to say right now. But everybody and people that I'm talked to, that he's talked to, saying that ain't fair. That ain't right.
Who would you say, Mr. Jones, that it's unfair to? Would you say that it's unfair to the Lumbee tribe as a whole, to the members of your district, to yourself, to the process? Who would you say that it's unfair to?
I would start first with the Lumbee people, because I've had a council person in council said I had an axe to grind. This Mr. Rudy could have done this, but he chose not to. I'm not going to put words because he's not here, but we talked about it. But he chose not to. I chose to challenge it. because I think it's, first of all, it's not fair to all the people, because things could change again. We could set the precedent right now where it's what's fair for one group, it's fair for everybody. That's why I brought this instead of, I don't know, I tried to talk, being new and learning. I asked about ordinances and things. We did bring this up, but I had several council that felt like we're not going to talk about it. I had no other choice.
Miss Miss Mitchell, in a way, alluded to this point. Um, would this be an issue if there were the same number of districts as there are numbers of representatives?
If and we don't have that. If someone sat out, someone, okay, let's just say myself, I had 2 consecutive terms. This person here ran for my seat and got it and had to leave out, sickness or whatever. I'm not eligible for that. I'm not eligible to slide, one district, one person, and
Yes,
then that next person had to leave all of a sudden. I'm
yes.
not eligible for that. That's what I think about. I'm thinking about the people. I'm thinking down the road. I'm not thinking about right now, my seat. I'm thinking about down the road. We're setting a precedent now what's fair to the people. And to answer your question, it would be fair to his constituents because we'll be doing the right thing. Or District 7, that's the one I worry about with 3 and 3-year terms. One group could just spin cycle there.
I guess my question is there are how many districts? Is there 14? 14 districts? And there are 21 council members. If there were 21 districts and there were no staggered elections and there was one election per district, one seat per district, would there be a time where you would have where a person could theoretically come off the council and run for that same district within that 3-year period?
It sounds like what you're saying. If we keep it like it is right now, that could happen. That could happen. We could set something up to the point where I'm going to run. I know you were out, but you run and then you leave and I'm gonna come back in, and we just rotate. I mean, just all kinds of scenarios. But if we set it, we can't. We won't have that. It would be the 3-year.
It, Dr. Clark,
These lived in the same district. I had served 2 consecutive terms,
yes,
so she wins. So say like a year or so into her term, she passes away.
yes.
I could run again because I haven't been on there. There's been a break in my service. So there are, even in one district seats, there is that opportunity for those individuals to run again. I mean, you never know. I mean, the same thing happened with Miss Jan. That's why Miss Jan was able to run. We had the death of a sitting council. So
In that scenario that you just posed, Dr. Clark, would you believe that the elections board, and I'm not asking you to speak for the entire elections board, but you can if you like, in that same scenario, do you believe that you would come to the same conclusion that you did in
they
this
could run
particular?
again.
Yes.
Yeah, because again, it was the word consecutive. That's really, it was that word. We all have our own opinions about a matter or how we might feel about a matter. But on this board, we are governed by the laws that this council writes and the Constitution.
In, in fairness, though, that would be a different seat, correct?
Both in District 4,
Yes.
and she serves her 2 terms. She comes off, I go on, I pass away, and then she
But I mean,
runs.
exactly. So that would be you would be on the same. It would be the same seat.
Right. It'd be the same seat.
In this situation, it would
Right. This situation is a little
different
different. But
seat.
you ask him, if we had the 21 seats with one representative per district, would there ever be an opportunity for what's happening to
Right.
happen? And I was just describing that.
Okay, that's fair. Yes,
If there is 21 single districts, the person that wins, okay, if he wins, does a consecutive term, then he sits off. And he'll have to sit off 3 years because if it's a single district with one seat, all single districts, they have to sit off until that person vacates that seat or not win the next
yes,
election. So what's trying to go on now in the tribal council is to um, redo the drawing of the maps. And it's got to be by population, equal population, all that stuff. But that's what they're in the process of doing. They have already put out one form of a map that they're working on, but it's not finished. And the
yes.
court actually ordered the council to do redistrict or, have 21 districts in one of the cases that there was. So if it's single districts, automatically that person that wins is going to sit there 3 years, not unless he dies or something happens. And then he may have that opportunity to run again. If he wins, then he's serving that time. That's a consecutive term. That's 2 year consecutive term. But then the Constitution doesn't say that he could never run again. There's
Yes.
nothing there that says that.
So in the scenario with Mr. Locklear and Miss Lowry, when she sought to run for that vacated seat, that was a different seat than the one that she had
That she
previous,
had previously held.
which would have
Yes.
meant that that would have been a distinctly different term,
Well, it was
which is similar to this. And to the example that you just gave, would be the same seat. That would be a distinction because you would have an identifiable term when that term began. It- We've had to wear our thinking caps on this case, don't we? Yes.
In a manner that everybody is able to understand. It's easy for us to explain. May not always agree, but if it's rooted in the law and in the Constitution, and we can explain it, then fairness has been achieved.
and Miss Donner,
Yes.
I'd just like to add to that. In 2001, or when we had to rewrite the Constitution, and I think Mr. Richard mentioned it about staggering terms. Well, those seats at that time became staggering terms. So every year we have 7 districts that's up for election. Even in the chairman's race, we have 7 districts. So it's like Dr. Clark said, it's the seats. It's not the people. I mean, I know people run and they want to be elected and all that, but it's been staggered. It's been set in place. I don't know what's going to happen whenever the maps are redone. Redistrict 21, because that's going to bring in a little issue maybe.
Do you
But
have any knowledge of that, Mr. Jones?
Yes, I do.
Would you?
We first discussed on council of governments to do the maps. They were just astronomically high. We just purchased a new software system at the tribe. We made the motion to let the software look at it. It's doing a great job. Some preliminary maps are already out. Due to us not having Zoom, I was out of town at the time, so I didn't get to see the maps or was not in that discussion.
Does it appear to you that it's the will of the council to move to a?
Yes, to a one district. A one equal representation, just like what I'm asking for here.
Yes.
Equal representation, one person, one council, one district. What's fair for one, be fair for all.
And so, in fairness, if that were already the case, if we were already dealing with a one person, one council, one person, one seat district, we likely wouldn't be here this evening.
Well, in this case, we're talking about someone up for reelection, possibly leaving. The other one we were talking about, we could possibly talk about somebody leaving for whatever reason.
Yes.
Whatever reason, whether it's election or a death, you should the Lumbee way and the way it's always been. You set out 3 terms, and this help. It isn't just the Lumbee will. It just helps in this case. We're still in. We can talk about what the council's trying to do, and we are working hard to get it to that point. But what if it's about like other issues we have on the council and it lasts for years? We can't just go on and say, well, it's silent and we're going to let people do things that could harm the tribe.
So to Ms. Mitchell's point, when she says that the elections board believes that there is silence as it relates to how long a person must wait out before they would not violate the consecutive requirement. And I believe, in fairness to you, you said in your presentation that you believe the Constitution is not silent.
Correct.
And you referenced 3 additional provisions in the Constitution that
where it talks about terms.
Can you just elaborate a little bit more how those particular provisions in the Constitution are not silent on that particular issue of how long a person must wait before they run again?
Well, it talks about each one has a different term. Board of Elections Board 6 years. I think the justice 5 years.
Yes.
The council 3 years. So those right in itself, we're talking about terms how long you may have to stay out. But when they wrote I guess the only best way I can see it, I wrote it in one way, what I thought was not fair.
Yes.
To the people. But when they put out what they said, they had every opportunity to make it fair for the people and put the ball in the court on somebody that's looking for a loophole. That's how I'm looking at their responses. But the Lumbee way and the way things are and the way people say it, you sit out. I mean, we've even practiced that. You sit out 3 years. I can't help it, Miss. I wish I almost asked Mr. Rudy to come here because I thought he had something good to say, but he didn't challenge it. I don't want to put words out there that he said she said. He didn't challenge it. People think, like Mr. Larry said, what do you say but when your constituents? At first, I wasn't going to challenge it, but people came to me and said, knowing how you are about your people, you want this right. It's just going to eat at you. It's got to be fair across the board. And I was reading these things. I've read it. It's just got to be fair across the board. I'm no better. We're no better than people in District 1 or we are any better in District 7 or 12 or 5.
Do you believe that consideration of fairness is what is driving the council to address shifting to a 21 district council?
Fairness and equality.
I believe it's because of scenarios just like this.
No, I think it's because, to a certain degree, things like this. But what I've listened to the constituents and other people say, because I've only been on it now 3 years, we got serious about it the last 2 years, that if you've got one, okay, just like mine, like District 6, me and Christy live in the Pembroke area, but we represent Raff Swamp. I got people in Raff Swamp. I started in church at Raff. I started my church days over in the Raff Swamp community. My grandparents are from the Raff Swamp community. So when I get out that way, I try to represent the people. I go to the fire department, but I do live in Pembroke. And I do hear them say, well, I hear them, what they say. He does come out here and he does the job with us, but he's from Pembroke. But I think with this new the way they're going to redo the maps, it's going to be fairness. But in this same sense, if we don't do something about it, somebody could run 2 consecutive terms. The next person could get sick for whatever reason, within 1 year of them coming on. Because there's rules if you've been there more than, if there's like 1 year left, there's another set of rules for that. And that person could run again. And here we are, look at what we got. The person could resign under some kind of, under some kind of pressure. That other person could come in. We do not want to sit that. We don't want to give anybody that opportunity.
Mr. Chavis, who currently holds your previous seat, one that you relinquished in 22?
Miss Christie Rebels Hunt.
Okay. If Miss Christie Rebels Hunt were to resign tomorrow, would you believe that you could file for her seat? Or do you believe that there would be a distinction between you filing for that seat and filing for this seat?
Yeah, I believe there'll be a distinction between the two seats. Because I held that seat there, so this is a different seat. And, I'm just doing what the people in the community asked me to do. The people speak. That's all. I look at the people. Like I told Richard, I said the people does the voting, and we go from there.
How about the elections board? Yeah.
District, they do have separate elections. They're on different rotations.
Yes.
So,
And if Miss Christie is here and listening right now, this is not an invitation for you to resign. This is only hypothetical.
yeah.
But if she were, and that seat became vacant, would the elections board feel the same way about Mr. Chavis seeking election in that seat? Consecutive. Even though it would be the same term, same seat.
Oh, I got you. But when we think of these things, we think of the seat. Not if it's her seat under the word.
Because he would have never been able to have ran from the beginning.
From the beginning, because it's that term. So now that would be a distinction.
Do you see the distinction in that, Mr. Jones?
I see a bunch of baited questions. It's easy to answer that, what you just said, but not one time have they brought that up. I've been saying the whole fair across the board. We know there's 2 people in this district. You know there's 3 in the other. Not once have you brought that up on your respondents about. I just think it's unfair. It's unfair. And we've been baiting questions. I would have said the exact same thing to Larry. If he asked me that question, it's just easy to say, yeah, oh no, that's a separate seat. It's not. We represent the whole area.
You're saying it's convenient for him to answer.
Oh yeah, I think it's very convenient, both sides. When we're not thinking about the people, if we just think about the people, not me, not Larry, not y'all, the people, it is not fair. We could sit here and rotate seats till we get the right person.
Yeah.
If there's no rule saying, if there was a rule stating if I resign, so someone that was behind me, we made that rule where they couldn't come in, I'd be apt not to resign. If I was that type of person, if I'm that type. But we could set up a political machine here by allowing this to go on. And I'm only thinking about the people. You think about a political machine and the money that we're dealing with right now. People are getting hot over this money, very hot. And there's ways they want it to go. They're worried about transparency. Transparency could be done away with if we don't watch what we're doing right here.
And in fairness to the elections board, I tend to agree that the word consecutive has strong implications for this case. And I'm going to ask I'm going to invite each to give their own definition of what they think that the word consecutive means and the implications that it has for this case. And so I'll start with you, Mr. Jones. When you hear that word consecutive, what does it mean to you as it relates to Article 7, Section 2?
that you got a candidate that has done 2 3-year terms
back to back.
back to back, back to back. Now I can't recall what the Mr. Paul Brooks and Larry Townsend. I can't specifically say about that case, but what we're talking about today is a person that's had 2 3-year terms, not a half a term and then a 3-year term and whether they can run again. We're not talking about that. We're talking about 2 3-year consecutive terms.
What would a third unconsecutive term look like?
When you're looking at the dynamics of our district and District 7 and those with 2, this really, I've said it, this is skirting it awful close. The same person's going back in the same pool of people within a 3-year term, whether it's 2 seats or 3 seats. Whether it's 1 seat and somebody decided to resign, that person is going back within that 3-year term. And the people it's not fair to the people, and the people need to have what's fair to them.
Mr. Chavis, this word consecutive, how would you define it in light of your involvement in this case, in light of Article 7, Section 2? And how would you describe a third unconsecutive term?
I'm just, I'm here for the people. I don't know why he keeps saying he's there for the people. Everybody's here for the people. I ain't in here to gain nothing from this council because I ain't never gained up from it, you know. But for the people, is their right to get out and vote. If they want Richard, they'll keep Richard. If they want me, they're going to vote for me. That's the name of the game. It's just a one-man show. One vote counts. You know what I'm saying? So I don't have a problem. I wouldn't have a problem if the shoe was on his feet. If he filed wanted to run, I wouldn't take it to court. I'd say the best man wins the show. That's the name of the game.
Elections Board?
Had a community member in August ask us that very question. That are consecutive, according to Webster's dictionary, is following after the other in order, successive.
Without interruption. Justices, any questions?
Yeah, I have a clarifying question for the election board on the scenario that was given if I think the current council person is Revel Hunts, correct? So if she vacated the seat today, and a term had already occurred in November 22. That's when the election occurred that she gained that seat, right? So why wouldn't, I mean, the seats, as I asked earlier, are not numerated. They are the same. They're just staggered elections. Why wouldn't that be considered a term that
Not consecutive?
that Mr. Chavis sat out? He sat on the November 22 ballot. She vacates the seat today. Would he, you're saying he would not be eligible to run for that seat?
Looking at seats, districts, not people. Technically, he would have, session would have remained kept because he would have gone right back on the same seat.
So then he would have to wait 3 years for that particular seat.
Which is what would exist in a 21 district, 21 member council.
Unless we were both in the same district, I died. Run again. Run, she may not be able to run. So what we've also have to look at. I don't want to mischaracterize our aspects of leadership. Got to maintain a certain level of knowledge on anybody to continue moving forward. Can't, if we start altering the staggering succession of serving based on whatever kind of ruling, we may wind up in a position where we have a whole lot of new people and not enough of individuals who have the connections that we need as a people to move forward in certain things that we need to do. So there's a lot of ramifications regarding what we're discussing now in terms of can an individual with experience not run. But of course, that's why we're here, is to clearly define that. But for us, consecutive means without a break. We're looking at seats, not people.
No question. For the election board, so if a candidate skips a ballot, is that considered breaking the consecutive terms? So if a candidate's name is not on a ballot during a cycle, does that count as not as breaking the consecutive terms? So if a candidate's name is not on a ballot, say Mr. Chavis comes up on the back end in November of his year number 6, and his name doesn't go on that ballot because he's coming off. No matter if it's 2 days, 6 months, a year later, does that break the consecutives? That count as him not being consecutive anymore.
Case with him with multiple seats, same district. If it's a seat that he had occupied, then our ruling would be that he could. Other seat in that district on a different.
Okay, so if it's in his same seat, it is your interpretation that it's a 3-year window that he has to set out if he's in his same seat. Is that what I'm hearing? I'm just trying to clear this up.
Has said that in a sense, the court has he went in and he only served for a year. They blamed us, or they blamed the election board at the time, for not recognizing that he had not served consecutive terms, which equaled 6 years. I think that's what the ruling stated. I think I'm right there. So look at the seat instead of the person, then we can prevent this thing of happening where I have to stop and see now how many years has it been. This person, although they ran, they can run again, but now when you run this time, you can only serve 2 years because then you'll be had to a 6.
If I'm not mistaken, in that case, isn't it the distinction in the Constitution with the chairperson? So if the chairperson dies or becomes disqualified for another reason, then you hold a special election to fill out the remainder of the seat. If they choose to back off or leave that seat for any other reason, i.e. illness, which was, if I'm not mistaken, the fact in that case, the chairperson decided to vacate the seat due to illness, you hold an election and that new chairperson gets 3 years. That's the distinction. With the chairperson, it's a 3-year term if the current chairperson leaves the seat, other than for death or another disqualifier.
Way the court ruled. And then I think the election board at that time, and we were not on that time, they disqualified him for running based on the fact that he was filling a term. He was filling a term of someone that had, I think you said, was sick or resigned or whatever, what the Constitution says. And that election board voted that he was not eligible to run after he had filled out the remainder of that term the next time, because I think he filled out the remainder of that term, then he served the term, one election, and then he was going to run again. But I think the court said he would only get one year or one term.
Yeah, 2 years.
I don't have that right in front
I
of
think
me.
the distinction, and not to go down the rabbit hole too far, but I think the election board said he could fill out the remainder of Chairperson Sweat's 1 year. which was incorrect. He should have been given 3 years because, and let me,
And
I think, I
that's what
think
the court said, yeah.
Chairman Sweat, with 1 year left, decided to depart as chairperson. Chairman Brooks was elected and should have been elected for 3 years. However, it was determined that he would only fill out the 1 year, the remaining term, which was incorrect. He won a subsequent term for 3, and then he was allowed to run again for 2 to give him 6 years. But there is a distinction between the chair seat and the council seat. And when someone chooses to step off for personal reasons.
Here's a question for the elections board. Why are there 14 districts? I think initially you said that there were initially 18. Now there's 14. Why is that?
In 2001, it's whenever, the court case between Manning and LRDA, and also we had to write another constitution. And at that time, I think the LSD commission voted to have representation across the United States. We had a representation in Washington State, and so that it made 18 districts, but actually there was about 24 people, if you include the chairman. There were, and I did not. I mean, the people that were working with the Constitution, as far as the maps and stuff, those people that knew all the lines and political. I didn't get into the drawing of it, but that's why we had 18 districts, because and then in 2003, whenever it was brought to the council that our territory was not across the United States, even though we have people that live in all these other states. But we couldn't claim that territory, because if we did, we would be claiming other tribes' territory, their land. So there was an amendment to the Constitution in 2003. And at that time, whenever the maps were drawn, it came 14 districts. And the reason that it's 14 is trying to keep these communities, like Philadelphia's community, Smyrna, where I live, the communities together, because of the way they had been voting in general elections, to try not to split that. So, along with the chairman and the council, that's how they came up with the 14 districts. One of the things about the 14 districts is that every person or every seat in those districts, they all have equal representation, even though District 6 has 2, District 2, in my district, we have 2 representatives, but each individual that holds that seat, there's equal representation of people. It may be 10% more, 10% less. But I think at that time, there was people that knew about the districts, knew about the lines, knew about the Board of Election lines and all of this stuff. So this is how we got 14 districts.
And that was around what time?
That was in 2004. I think the amendment happened in 2003 in March, and the Lumbee people overwhelmingly voted that they wanted it to be the Lumbee territory, yes. Robinson in Scotland. And so after that, then that's when they drew the maps, get the maps together. Or it might have been simultaneous.
So the council voted to go to a 14-member or 14 district territory, and the chairman at that time approved it.
Well, he didn't. He helped map it. He didn't. It was council's authority to approve it. It was not just a total chairman. Chairman couldn't. He couldn't approve it. I mean, he went along with it.
Okay.
But now, with the way the Constitution is now, there's 2 places in the Constitution. I can't show it to you right now, but I can if you want that information. But there's one place where it says 21 districts. And then there's another place where it says 21 members.
So I've got Article 7, Section 3 pulled up on my phone.
Article 7?
Yeah, Section 3. You have that in front of you? Would you read that for us?
The tribal council shall consist of 21 members, who shall be elected from districts within the Lumbee territory. These districts shall have boundaries as drawn in accordance with the provisions of Article 12, Section 3 below, which boundaries shall be redrawn within 1 year following the publication of each decennial federal census to maintain equal representation for each tribal member. And Your Honor, the court did rule that the tribal council get busy doing this and making sure that they use the enrolled members.
And you also said that the Constitution speaks of 21 tribal districts.
Um,
Is that the Article 12, Section
Article 12.
3B that you just spoke of?
Yes, I think so.
Can you read that?
It says, before the election in November of 2003, the present tribal officials shall draw boundaries for the 21 tribal council districts, provided that, you want me to read on?
Sure.
Each tribal member has equal representation on the tribal council, and the boundaries for tribal council districts shall be drawn and published throughout the tribal territory no less than 60 days in advance of the election to be held in November 2003.
How are there 14 districts?
How do we get 14 districts?
Well, I mean, I asked that because it's stunning to me that the Constitution says specifically 21 districts. And it appears the undisputed evidence tonight is that there's 14.
Right.
Long debate among our people.
Has this never come before the Supreme Court?
Yeah, about changing it?
No,
Yeah.
about the constitutionality of a number of districts different than 21.
Well, yeah, that's been before the court, and the court ruled that they need to change to 21.
What do you say, Mr. Jones?
On this particular thing, it should be 21. So that way we know that it's fair. That what happens in District 1 is the same thing going to happen in District 6. But at this point in time, a comment was just made to insinuate that I've been saying it the whole time. This ain't about me. It just so happens to be in my district.
Yeah.
But it's really about the people. Until we get to this point, we gotta set precedent, some way to make it fair.
Is it accurate what Ms. Mitchell just said, that this court has ordered and instructed the council to implement a 21 district, 21 member, 21 seat, 21 district territory?
I didn't. I don't recall
That may be, yeah, may not
I
be
don't
fair to
recall
ask.
that, but it does say in the Constitution after the census. Now, this is how it was brought to me.
Yes.
All right, the census is about to take place. Are you guys going to redo the mapping? That's how I first heard about
This
it.
was
Then,
something recent.
yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay.
So once I got on, that conversation kept coming up, and then it got to the point. Hey, we need to get on this and start working. Now that's how it come before the council. It was brought to, by people on the council and our citizens.
Election board member number 1. Say your name again.
Rubelina Locklear.
Ms. Locklear. I appreciated your commentary when you said this is a long-standing issue. People, can you offer some insight on that?
Well, yeah, just so you know, like we said before, we all have our personal opinions about the outcome of this case today. But it's what is written and how it's written in there that we have to be interpreted. So what we try to do as a board is always be fair, always follow the law, always this what if scenarios, but At the end of the day, we set our personal opinions aside and we follow the law according to how it's written. So I feel that the council, the Supreme Court, they could eliminate a lot of these headaches for us, a lot of this by making it clear cut. Well, a person sits off um, 3 years. If you want it to be 3 years, then state that because that's just how the law is.
So it's
It's
council's
in
fault.
black and white. No, no. I'm just saying that there needs to be some modifications made um, all around.
And so why, and this may be not fair to ask you, not because your opinion's not valuable, but because you may not know. Do you have any understanding why this 21 districting hasn't happened yet? It's been instructed in,
Well, I've actually had the opportunity to look at the new map that has been proposed,
yes,
and it looks fair and equitable according to the population. Whereas I'm District 7 myself, I live in the Union community. District 7 is now joined up with South Pembroke, so my representation is Union and South Pembroke. And according to that size, we have 3 tribal council members. Whereas when it's to the 21, then Union will have its own representative, and South Pembroke will have its own representative.
how would this affect existing council members? They have to, will there be 21 entirely new elections? How would that? So for instance, Mr. Jones is currently situated in District 6,
Yeah, North Pembroke.
North Pembroke. When this redistricting plan goes forward, will he still be considered District 6?
Yes, he is. I don't think that, just like Miss Louise stated previously, you can't continue to move forward with a total new body. You got to leave some people on there, which accounts for the staggering. So with that point, you might have a third of the representatives to rotate off each year, but you can't start over completely with a total new body.
Who will determine who staggers off and
Surely
when?
not the election board. I would say,
Yeah, they draw. Okay,
yeah.
all right. Yeah, go ahead, Miss Mitchell.
We did it by straw or, drawing. They called it like 1 year, 2 year terms. And I drew a 1 at that time, so I only served that 1 year for my district. So I'm not sure when they draw the lines, the maps, and I've been thinking about this ahead of time too, how that's going to affect, because those lines are going to be drawn by the software.
Yeah.
And it might be that Mr. Richards, where he's at now, he might be drawn into something else, and he maybe have won that seat there. So I don't know how that's going to work out, but it's going to be challenging, I think.
That does seem challenging, don't it, Mr. Jones?
Yes, it does.
How? So help us with this, with the new redistricting. Certainly, if you are the council member at that time, Miss Revels is council member at that time, both of you can't continue to be District 6. Is that right?
That's correct. Whatever number it's, I'm thinking, I'm just assuming that it's going to be North Pembroke Raft Swamp. The way it looks now on the map, because it sort of pinches around the Moss Neck community.
Oh.
You got North Pembroke and Raft Swamp with the railroad tracks sort of divide. And Chicken Road.
What would determine?
I've thought about this. It could be anything. We could draw straws. Whoever's election. Let's just say, I'm on the council, but it's okay. Let's just say Miss Christie's on the council. We're both on there, and my election's up next.
Yeah.
Well, Miss Christie's already in North Pembroke, so it would behoove, I would think, that would be a Raft Swamp election.
I would think now it's going to be tough, especially for those people that were on the border. I can think of two councils right now. They stay fairly close to each other. If it it, it could divide up and they could be in a new total district, whole new district. So we really don't know until that time. It's going to take some discussion. That's why I say things on the council is just not as cut and dry.
It's
And we can,
complicated.
it's very, and you got to think about the people. And when I got on here, we always talk about 7 generations. We just had a controversial thing on our ethics. I was a little concerned with, but it moved on. But I think about what down the road when we could have fixed it immediately. Um, I'm just thinking about the people. And like I said, just so happened, it is my district. I would have, if Mr. Rudy would have went to this, chose to do this, I'd have been right beside him because I was really hoping he would. I'd have been right beside him.
So in this redistricting plan, if you and Miss Christie end up being in the same district, how would that work? Will you draw straws to see who remains?
That's I'm up for any option that's fair and equitable.
And the
But
council hasn't gotten that far yet.
we just hadn't got to that part yet. I'm all for. I'd be up for anything. There's probably another idea out there, but I would think whoever's term is up next in them because it's 7 at a time. It's 7 seats at a time, so that could fix it within a term of council within 3 years. If we chose to do that, this would help affect. I mean, help it tremendously.
If I may, is there an anticipated implementation date right now, a goal date, or did I miss that for the 21 districts that you guys are aware of? To your knowledge, is there a goal date?
Meeting that I was at, there's no time set except I did hear it may take at least 2 years. That's what I heard at a meeting, but I really don't know.
Thank you.
And I think where we're at now, we've got some preliminary maps. We got to put it out to the people. Have some public hearings on it, and we've got to discuss it. Maybe another public hearing, then discuss, then possibly a finale public hearing.
Would you agree that a 14 district electorate is not in compliance with the Constitution?
I'm 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 picking up on stuff by the minute with this case. Reading that, reading the Constitution, it does not. But knowing what we're doing, knowing what the council's doing, and knowing how we've I don't know, reading this, it just sounds it doesn't sound right.
What do you say, Mr. Chavis?
Constitution, there's 21 districts.
Does anyone else want to be heard any further? Does the justices have any other questions? Jones, you're grabbing the mic.
Yes. Two times in this thing I've been hurt. One in council when I said I had an axe to grind, and everybody on that council knows I work for the people. That kind of hurt me to the heart. And then to sit here and insinuate that I'm doing this not for the people. This is strictly for all Lumbees, all Lumbees. I just happen to be that type of person to stick my neck out. This isn't a very good way to start a campaign. I'm taking chances, but I know one thing: I'm for the people, and it's got to be fair across the board. That's all, just fair across the board.
Anyone else have a closing statement they'd like to make? We're going to recess, and I'm going to go deliberate. This is a tough one because it has a lot of layers. I do want to take the time to thank the audience. I interpret by your attendance here tonight that this matters to you. and it matters to this court that this matters to you. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your patience, for bearing with us and allowing us to conduct what we hope to be a fair and impartial and effective and efficient thorough hearing. Thank you. We're going to be in recess.
All rise.
May be seated. I want to first say that I think that resonates with this court, Mr. Jones, when you say that this is an issue of fairness and equity. I think you're right about that. I think that those questions of fairness and what's equitable is it ought to be the driving principle for this government. It ought to be the driving principle for this court, for the council, for the elections board. Is important. It's very concerning to this court when we see provision in the Constitution that specifically says 21 districts, and we hear an unrebutted statement that this court has determined in the past that a non-21 district territory is unconstitutional, and that we still operate with a 14 district constitution. That's concerning to this court. We're not making any conclusions about whether or not that's true. We're not aware of any previous Supreme Court cases, but I find Ms. Mitchell to be a very credible person. I think if she says that this court has decided in the past that a 14 district territory is unconstitutional, I have no reason to not believe her when she says that. And yet, I don't feel that this court can make a determination tonight based on what's before us whether or not a 14 district territory is constitutional. That's not what's before us. If it were, this court may make a conclusion about the constitutionality of it. We believe that a fair hearing on that would require persons to come to this court, give them adequate notice, give them adequate opportunity to give reasons for and against the current state of the 14 district territory. For whatever reason, for nearly 20 years, our tribal government has been operating with a 14 district territory. And now it appears to be undisputed to this court that there is movement that is happening to come into compliance with a 21 district requirement that appears on its face to be what the Constitution requires. And that appears to be undisputed by all parties. And so the narrow question that is before this court this evening is whether or not Mr. Larry Chavis should be allowed to run for a third term, actually for a fourth term. We've heard argument about whether or not the Article 7, Section 2 restricts persons to only 2 terms. Court is not convinced that that is so. Court is not convinced that a council member is limited to only 2 terms. We believe that the word consecutive does have great intrinsic meaning. So we would agree with the elections board as it relates to that. The question is whether or not this term that would begin in November of this year, would that be a third consecutive term for Mr. Chavis? That's the only question that we're dealing with. How do we get to that answer? And so the court's process in dealing with this is we're looking at, Mr. Jones, we're looking at your petition. We're looking at the election board's response. We're considering all the testimony that's been made here tonight. This is what Mr. Jones says in his petition. The Constitution says you can only run 2 consecutive terms. This gives the understanding that one must wait a term before applying for re-election. The Constitution does not give exceptions, and therefore, by allowing a former council person to seek re-election without waiting a term in a district with 2 or more council is not fair or being equal to the people in a district with 1 council person. The Elections Board, in citing Larry Townsend v. Lumbee Tribe Elections Board from 2004, they quote that a term was defined as the following: when a person files for election for a district seat for the tribal council and wins such election, then at the swearing-in ceremony, the said person begins that term. So the question is what is that term, and what district seat for tribal council is it referencing in that definition? So for this court, as we read Mr. Jones' petition, as we rely on the evidence that's been gathered here tonight, as we rely on that statement from Townsend v. Lumbee Tribe Elections Board, we do not believe that that definition of term specifies specifically a 3-year period. I think the natural assumption would be that when defining a term, it would give a definition for how long that term would be. That's not the definition that was given in Townsend v. Lumbee Tribe Elections Board. It did not give a period of time. It gave a designation of beginning of a time. We can only conclude that that means that Mr. Larry Chavis would be precluded from running for a 3rd consecutive term in the tribal seat that he sought by filing for election for a tribal district seat and winning that election. And then at that swearing in of that ceremony, the person begins that term. Mr. Chavis, in 2022, would have filed for candidacy for that district seat, and he won that election. And at that swearing in, that would have been the beginning of that term for that seat. And this court can't come to the conclusion that that seat is this seat. We're not making any conclusions about the fairness of that. We're making a conclusion that based on the existence of a 14-district tribal territory and the fact that within Tribal District 6, there are staggered elections, we do not believe that we can exclude Mr. Chavis from running in this second seat because there is this interruption. There's been 1 year interruption. We would have to say that by running in this District 6 seat that is currently held by you, Mr. Jones, very distinct seat from the one that he ran in previously that is now currently held by Ms. Revels. And this court, in good faith, say that that would be consecutive. We rely a lot on the reasoning of the Elections Board. We believe that your reasoning is persuasive. We believe that it was effective. We commend the Elections Board because we believe that you received questions surrounding not just the fairness, but what could you do in compliance with the Constitution? And so we commend you for that. And we agree with you. I will say, though, I don't know if we would come to this conclusion, Mr. Jones, if we had a 21-district tribal seat or tribal territory. If we had a territory with 1 seat per member, or 1 seat per district. I don't know if that's the conclusion that we would come to tonight, but we believe that given the fact that we are operating under those parameters, we have no other choice but to find that this does not violate that consecutive 2-term consecutive limitation, and for that reason, we can't grant you your petition, Mr. Jones. This matter is adjourned.
All rise.